Welcome to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco, bringing you interviews with industry experts and regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews in 60 days, guaranteed. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my podcast today. Today, we're going to do things a little differently. Usually, I bring on a guest, and I did have a guest lined up for today, but our signals got crossed, and we are now rescheduled for 2 weeks from now. So I thought I'd take the time instead to answer questions that have been coming in. I've been sort of collecting them, basically talking about the ins and outs of resume writing. So thanks for bearing with me through my ramblings today. I hope they make sense. If they don't, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is vafrancoresumes@gmail.com, or you can go to my website and shoot me an email through there. It's virginiafrancoresumes.com. So what I'd like to do is just start out by explaining my resume writing strategy. I have been writing resumes for, pretty much since I got out of school. But back then I didn't get paid for it. My background was journalism and corporate communications, which has allowed me to write for everything. I've done newspapers, magazines, websites, annual reports, a little bit of speech writing, just you name it, I've written it. And what I've learned over the years is that it really doesn't matter what we're reading when it comes to reading in a rush, because we all pretty much read the same way. And I like to use the analogy of how most of us skim the news when we have a couple seconds on our hands, because it's really identical to how decision makers are going to look at our resumes when they're in a rush. And really, 9 times out of 10, everyone is in a rush when they're reading our resumes. I have yet to hear a person that can say, oh, yeah, I have all the time in the world. Let me go through this stack of resumes. So let me talk about the analogy of how we read the news, because it's so similar, and a lot of my success facilitating skim reads of resumes comes from incorporating the principles that I learned back at the beginning when I was majoring in journalism and learning how to write for the news. So think about how you will look at the news when you want to know really quickly what's going on in the world. Whether you get an old-fashioned newspaper or you open up a site on your device, your desktop, you're probably not going to sit and read each article in its entirety. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to scan the headlines. And then if the headline interests you, you'll likely read the first, paragraph that follows. Chances are you're not going to read anything more than that. But what you've done by just having read those two parts is that, number one, you have a very clear idea of what the story is about. And then two, you know what you want to come back to when you have more time. By bringing those same two components over into resumes, I'm helping to achieve those same behaviors. I want to give the reader a strong sense of what the story is about, and then I want them to come back for more when they have more time. So the headline, when you bring it over into a resume, is called a career title. And this is where you tell the reader, I'm an astronaut, I'm a chef, whatever kinds of roles you're targeting, that's what you need to put on there. So what's beautiful about the headline, though, is that you can tweak it based on however you want to customize it for your audience. So let's say you want to position yourself as someone who has an industry niche or an industry expertise. So let's say you're a technology executive, but you want to target a role in a bank, and your background has been, IT banking for years. Your headline can read financial services technology executive or banking technology executive. But then if you want to use that same resume and use it for an opportunity outside of your industry, you just take the industry name off. So you take off financial services off of there or take banking off of there, and then suddenly you're positioned as industry neutral. So what I love about the headline is that is an easy place for you to customize for the reader what they will first see, because it really sets the stage. Now, when it comes to that paragraph that follows the headline, in newspapers, they call it the lead paragraph. But in resumes, it's called, it used to be where the objective statement was back when I was first writing these in the 20th century. That's what we called it. Then it sort of morphed into a summary section. Sort of the latest buzzword is to call it a branding paragraph. But basically, the purpose of that paragraph is to tell the reader, this is how I am the perfect fit for your role. And that did not used to need to be the purpose of that paragraph. Back when I first started writing, after I wrote objective statements and it morphed sort of into a summary section, that paragraph, I could get away with describing someone with a bunch of adjectives and then throw in maybe a few words that were related to the industry lingo, keywords or buzzwords, and that worked. Because people would spend a lot more time looking at it, and actually less eyes were on them than now. what I see now is that people are spending even less time looking up these than they certainly did 20 years ago. They say that if you are getting your resume in front of someone you don't know, you need to expect less than 10 seconds. I think if it's a second, third round read or the reader who's looking at it is a connection of yours or perhaps a second degree connection, you might get a little bit longer read, but not much. Secondly, gone are the days where you talk to one or two people and you get a job. Now it's more of a couple of rounds of interviews, maybe a phone screen and a panel interview. So bottom line, more people are looking at it. So more people, less time. That paragraph needs to distill right away how you're the perfect fit, where before you really didn't need to do that because one or two people might take some extra time to dive deeper, which they just don't do now. So how I write the summary section now is, number one, I'm going to identify, strengths and traits of yours based on, when I'm talking to clients, based on the story they tell me. But then I go to the job postings of interest. And by reviewing several postings, I can right away tell what are some common themes, key wording, key phrasing that sort of is apparent across different postings. And I make sure to weave that language into the summary section. The other thing that I do is I'm not going to describe someone with a lot of adjectives. I don't want to say that they have a strong track record of success or that they're highly accomplished or results driven, because even though most of the time those adjectives are accurate, what's happened is that so many people use the same language to describe themselves that way that they've just lost some of their meaning and become diluted. So I'm going to replace those kind of adjectives with nuggets of detail or nuggets of information that are absolutely unique to that person. So sometimes it might be a company name. Sometimes I might weave in some figures or some data. Just something so that if the reader looks at nothing else except for that headline and that paragraph that follows, the career paragraph or the branding paragraph, just like with the newspaper, they will have a very clear idea of what your story is about, and they're going to want to come back for more when they have more time. And it also really, really differentiates you from a sea of others who are still sort of describing themselves with that more generic, diluted language. Other piece that's really important to keep in mind, and I keep it at the forefront when I'm writing, is that I've got to make these documents appeal to online readers. 99% of your first-time readers are going to look at this on some sort of a screen. Upwards of half are going to probably be looking at it on a mobile device. How big that screen is, I don't know. People really don't print until third or fourth reads. And unfortunately, what happens is documents that are designed for print do not convey well online. But luckily, online documents still look great in print. And that's because our eyes actually do things a little differently when we read online, really differently than we do in print. And by recognizing that and making some accommodations, you can actually facilitate reads of anything written online, from an email to website content to a resume. The first thing that we do differently is that we have a really, really hard time absorbing dense blocks of text on screen. And a dense block of text might mean a 6-line paragraph, or it could mean a bunch of single-line bullets all crammed together. So think about when I don't know if you have kids and you ever have to edit their papers, or, those iTunes contracts that come up. Think about when you see, 8, 9, 10 lines of text, plus the fact that the fonts are small, that's a whole other thing. But when a lot of times, I know for me, when I am skimming something on a screen and it's just a ton of text crammed in, my eyes glaze over and I fight the urge to print. That is because our eyes have a hard time skim reading too much text. So what you can do to overcome it is super simple. If you keep your paragraphs or your bullets to 2 to 3 lines max, and then you just add a little bit of white space, maybe half an inch, which is about 0.5 when you're using Microsoft Word, or just hit the enter bar. That little bit of white space really makes all the difference, and it just makes it easier for the eye. And when something's easier on the eye, you're more apt to read it. And then conversely, if something's tough to read and someone's in a rush, you run the risk that they won't look at it at all. The other piece that we do differently is that our eyes actually don't read from left to right as smoothly online as we do in print. For some reason in print, our eyes track, back and forth, left to right, no problem. But on screens, what we do is that we start left just like we would in print, but then our eyes jump all over the place depending on what captures our attention. We're all sort of ADD when it comes to screens. So what that means for me when I'm writing is that I need the most important part of whatever I'm crafting to be. I need that most important language to appear at the beginning or the left side of the sentence or the bullet, where at least I know the eye will start to take it in, because there's no guarantee that the eye is going to go all the way to the end of the sentence. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're in sales and you come up with a sales strategy and you grow your revenues 30% in 2 years. What I need to write for the online read is grew revenue revenues 30% in 2 years by creating and executing, XYZ sales strategy. That's the online read. What I could write if I was writing in print, though, is I could say, created and executed XYZ strategy that grew my revenues 30% in 2 years. So the difference is that those stats need to appear at the beginning because that's the most important part of the sentence. Numbers always speak louder than words. So I'm going to make sure that pertinent information appears front-loaded on the left side of the sentence. The next piece that's so important to include below that, we've talked about headline, we've talked about the branding or the summary section, we've talked about online reading, the skills section. More often than not, I do include a skills section, and I put it up above the experience section. What I love about that skills section is it is a great place to put, not soft skills like communication or, listening or anything like multitasking. It's the kind of place where you put your expertise. And when someone, think about those first round reads, a lot of times people are skimming these documents, trying to just quickly ascertain if you're a good fit. The skill section is a great place for them to identify those certain words that they have been trained to look for. The best place to find those, a lot of times people, don't really know where to look. The best place to find those is going to the job post, and you will see the skills. They usually can pertain specifically to an industry or specifically to a job function. After that, we need to talk about the experience section. And what I have found is that when people are in a rush, after they look at that headline in the lead paragraph, what they're going to do is look at where and when you worked. And because they're pressed for time, I can only count on them reading that very first bullet or that very first paragraph. So rather than leading off with something that says, this is an overview of my job, this is what the company was about, I recommend leading off with whatever you're proudest of. So ask yourself, at the end of the day when I left this job or in my current role, if I leave tomorrow and I reflect back on this tenure, where do I feel like I left my mark? Lead off with that. If you can quantify it, even better. Quantifying it might be, revenue growth. Gosh, it can mean a whole bunch of things. It might mean saving time. It could mean saving money. It could mean making money. It could mean stemming or fixing a hot mess, turning around a team. Whatever it is where you feel like you made your biggest mark with the department, organization, et cetera, that's what you lead off with. When it comes to the experience section, focus on achievements rather than a laundry list of all of your responsibilities. When you show what the problem was, the strategy that you used to overcome it or to address it, and then the final outcome, that is how you hook the reader, because then the reader can look at it and say, I clearly see the problem, I clearly see the pain that was solved, and they are able to connect the dots as to how you could be a good fit to solve their problems. I try to stick with no more than 5 bullets. Just like the eye has a hard time digesting text, we have a hard time digesting too much of anything. 6, 7, 8, 9 bullets can be rough on the online eye. And we don't want to risk that they'll skip them when they have more time to read. If I have more than 5 bullets, often what I'll do is I'll subcategorize them. So I might group them into certain like categories. And so the eye is then sort of tricked to see, 3 bullets under this category, 4 bullets under the other category. The other thing that I keep in mind when it comes to resumes is that I don't need anyone to know if my client is 35 or 85. I say it all the time. I want the document to be timeless. And for me, it's not so much about age discrimination, although I do know that that's a concern, and it's a real concern. But what I know for sure is that for some reason, when we are reading resumes, and this does not happen on LinkedIn, but when we're reading resumes and we start seeing dates that are right now, it's, around 1998 to 2000, all of us go down this rabbit hole when we're reading and say, oh, I wonder how old that person is. I wonder how old their kids are. I wonder when they went to school. Just all this side nonsense that really detracts from the achievements and the goal at hand, which is to show the reader how you're a good fit. And when we just have 10 seconds to impress a reader, none of us can afford for 2 or 3 seconds then with the reader down that rabbit hole trying to calculate, our age and the age of our kids and all of that. And for some reason, when we don't include that, when we don't include dates to that earlier 20th century experience, the brain just doesn't go there. So what I'll do is if there is earlier experience that makes sense to include, maybe it shows career progression, or maybe it's a company that is really notable in the industry that you're targeting. I don't want to not include it, but what I'll do is I'll lump it under an earlier experience category, and I'll synopsize it. I'll remove dates from it. Sometimes I might include a little, if I have room, I might include one little quick sentence that says, what the final impact was. But sometimes I'll just list the company name and the job title. So again, you have to sort of figure out what the purpose is behind including it in terms of determining exactly what to include on there, but always remove the dates from that. All right, now what I want to do is just sort of answer a couple questions that people have been sending from me from time to time. The first question I often get is, what's the ideal length? And the truth is that there's no one true answer, and everyone has different opinions. So I'll just use this forum to share mine. My thought is that if you have, less than 5 years of experience, I don't see any reason why one page would not suffice. In fact, in my opinion, it's expected that it should be about 1 page. More than that, 2 pages cuts it 9 times out of 10. It is rare for me to have a resume that's longer than 2 pages. Sometimes I'll include an addendum section that includes additional information, but to me, the critical experience usually can fit on 2 pages. I know some people will go to 3 pages, but what my sense is that I'm just always worried about those readers that are out of patience, and when they see a 3-page document, I'm afraid they'll just say, too long. So I don't want to even run the risk. So I always do my best to keep it to 2 pages. The other question I get a lot is font and then the size of the font. In terms of the font, again, I keep in mind reading for the online eye. And fonts that do not have serifs, or they're called sans serif fonts, those work best on screens and they still look great in print. So a serif is, for those of you who don't know, it's the little tail that you see on the edges of certain letters on certain fonts. And they look fabulous in print. But for some reason, just those little extra lines, especially on small screen read, it's just a harder read. So sans serif fonts work best. And a couple that are real common on a Word are Calibri, Arial, Helvetica, Century Gothic. You go with those, you'll be fine. Now, in terms of the font, when you're speaking of the online read, the font size shouldn't really matter because it's easy for someone to just augment the text. But in the event that someone does print it out, which again is likely to happen during the 3rd or 4th read, to me, I try to stick to 10 to 11 size font. Smaller than that could be rough, bigger than that, and you just can't get what you need on the page. So just stick to 10 to 11 size sans serif fonts. Another question I get a lot is, do I need to include the months and the years of every title or just the years? What I do is when someone has 20 years of experience without any gaps, I'm most likely to just include the years. It just makes for a cleaner resume, and the months just really don't matter at that point. However, if someone has a limited work history, I am more likely to include the months and the years, because that way, if someone was maybe in a role for 20 months, I want to show that it was 20 months, whereas if I just put the years on it, it might only look like a year. When I am trying to camouflage a potential career gap, I will also remove the months because, again, if you took 6 months off or you had, an 8-month gap between your roles, that can be camouflaged by removing the months and just sticking with the years. Another question that I get all the time is, what do I include in the contact section? And that's a really good question because my answer has evolved over time. Today, I will put your city, state, and zip code on there. I am not seeing any need right now to put a full address, with one exception. If you are targeting a local search, or your role, the ties to your community are important, if that's important, then by all means go ahead and put the full address. But a lot of people have privacy concerns, which I respect. And in terms of recruiter searches, the city, state, and zip code is more than enough. The other piece that you should put on there, obviously, is your phone number. Just stick with one number. No need for home and mobile. But just make sure whatever the number is, it has voicemail, you check it, and that no one else will pick up the phone aside from you. The other thing that you should include, obviously, is an email. And if I recommend a web-based email. Stay away from the AOLs of the world, only because those appear a bit dated in people's minds. And we want to make you appear timeless. So Gmail is great. Me.com is great. But make sure to include your email on there. And a personal email, not a work email. Lastly, I always make sure to include your LinkedIn URL, because people are naturally going to look at your LinkedIn, so you might as well include the URL on there. The other question I get often is, what are your thoughts on color? Should I include it? Should I not? And, I'm a huge fan of color. I keep in mind the industry that I'm targeting. So, if it's a more creative industry, I might go wild with reds or oranges or anything like that. Whereas a more conservative industry, I might stick with navy. But what I can tell you is that when people are looking at a stack of resumes, especially when they're looking at these on screens, that color just is a breath of fresh air. And so I'll use it though, not necessarily sporadically, but I'm very strategic in it. I will maybe use color with the name, the headers, maybe to connotate specific things I want to call out. Like if I want to highlight where you went to school, I might make that in a color, and then the degree that you held in black or vice versa. So think about what I want to highlight when I am putting color in. People often ask me about graphs and charts because those are becoming more popular. And I am a huge fan of depicting graphically or in charts what I'm also trying to say when someone reads it. The thing that you need to keep in mind with graphs and charts is that if you need to upload your resume to a company's website where applicant tracking software or ATS software is reading it before it ever gets in front of a human being, ATS can't read those charts. So whatever is depicted graphically, you need to make sure that content is also somewhere else in the document. So even though often you're repeating yourself, let's say you have a graph that shows your sales growth, you need to make sure to spell that out somewhere in a bullet or somewhere else in the text, and then also depict it on a chart. And even though it's duplicative, think about how people read. They might on first read look at the graph, but then when they take their time, they'll read it on the bullet. It's okay to have it twice. Just make sure that it's in the text so that when it's uploaded, the software can read it. It won't be able to read it online. Again, I think graphs and charts are great. Don't make them super busy because, again, you got to make sure that they're just as easy to read in print as if someone's opening it up on their mobile device. So a quick test is to save your document as a PDF and run it past your mobile phone. I have an iPhone, I have a 7 Plus. And if I can't get the salient points just by scrolling through with my thumb, I go back to the drawing board. And so to me, that is the ultimate litmus test. I feel like I've covered most of the main questions that people have for me, as well as my resume writing strategy. I'm happy to answer any other questions, but thank you all for listening. Again, if you have any questions, you know where to reach me, virginiafrancoresumes.com, or my email is vafrancoresumes@gmail.com. Hope everyone has a great day.
You've been listening to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's SKIM online readers, hiring and decision makers, go to www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.